U.S. Commitment to European Security, The Era of Uncertainty, moderated by Ms. Valerie Hopkins.
Thanks very much. I'm glad you can all be here on the panel. We have excellent guests. I'm very glad to be back here for my second 2BS. Last year, I moderated a panel on a similar topic, and the main theme of that panel was essentially, does Europe have a Donald Trump contingency plan? The answer that we came up with was more or less a very nuanced but resounding no. So 1 year later, we can sort of think about where things are as we stand. But first, to introduce the panelists, Ms. Laura Cooper is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia at the Department of Defense. Professor Dr. Fabrizio Luzioli is the President of the Atlantic Treaty Association and the President of the Italian Atlantic Council. He's also a professor of International Security Organizations, Military Policy, and National Security Policy at the Center for High Defense Studies of the Italian Ministry of Defense. I think that's the longest title we've had today. And Professor Dr. Milica Pejanović-Đurišić served as Montenegro's defense minister from 2012 until November of last year, and has a very storied career in diplomacy and technology, if I'm not mistaken. So 1 year since our last panel, we've seen President Trump, now President Trump, make a raft of contradictory statements regarding NATO and even offend some of our closest traditional allies like Canada and Australia. However, the president has changed his tune from NATO is obsolete on the campaign trail and ahead of his inauguration to saying it's no longer obsolete, after meeting 1 month ago with Secretary General Stoltenberg, during which he said that NATO had started to fight terrorism on his urging, and that every generation has strived to adapt the NATO alliance to meet the challenges of their times. And on his visit to Brussels in 2 weeks' time, he is looking forward to working together to do the same. So this is a marked departure from his rhetoric as a candidate. Do you expect that in Brussels in 2 weeks we will hear a new version of MAGA, Make Alliances Great Again?
Well, thank you for that. And before I respond to that, I just want to take a moment to thank the hosts and to recognize how happy I am actually to be here in Montenegro on the eve of Montenegro's NATO accession. I think that this really represents a lot of hard work by a lot of people in Montenegro, in Washington, D.C., and in capitals across Europe. So on this occasion, it's especially nice to be here in Montenegro. On your question about the U.S. commitment to NATO, I actually think that if you look at all of the statements, you mentioned a couple of statements, but if you look at all of the statements since January 20th, the beginning of this administration, you can really see a lot of consistency in U.S. commitment to NATO that parallels the statements of previous U.S. administrations. I had the opportunity in February to join Secretary of Defense Mattis in his first NATO Defense Ministerial, and on that occasion, he reaffirmed that the U.S. commitment to NATO's Article 5 is, his words, rock solid. And I think that really reflects that deep and enduring commitment of the United States. More recently, the president, on the occasion of his meeting with the NATO Secretary General, reaffirmed that NATO is a bulwark of international peace and security. So I think when you have the coming summit meeting, future defense ministerials, you're really going to see this message reiterated, because U.S. leaders today recognize that NATO is an essential element of dealing with all of the security challenges that the U.S. faces, whether you're talking about the challenge of Russia or the challenge of the rise of ISIS and violent extremism, or even refugee flows and migration challenges. NATO is essential to meeting all of these challenges.
Thanks very much. Dr. Luzioli. In March, my friend and colleague Max Fisher wrote a piece for the New York Times about the fact that Europeans are exploring new options for collective security, including an EU nuclear weapons program. Jean-Claude Juncker has also said the EU needs a more common military headquarters to work towards a common military force. I mean, this is all in response to growing uncertainty. Is more military centralization an answer, and is it viable considering that the growing frustrations among member states and rising populism make it all the more difficult to push projects like collective European security and defense? And what should Europe be doing for its security, and what should the US be doing for Europe?
Thank you very much, Valerie. Let me join what has been said in pledging Montenegro for this great achievement, and particularly you as different capacities and recently as former Minister of Defense. We were working so much together for this joint endeavor, because this is an endeavor for everybody. And it's showing something that, in my opinion, it's answering many of the questions that we have today regarding the US commitment. It was just said that it was ratified by the US Congress and Senate, and this is a political commitment. And it means that the United States are still committed here in Europe. We are all together for the same values of quite 70 years ago, that is to defend our free societies, our values, our population, territories, and with different means, but the same goal of the 4th of April of 1949. That's NATO. That's why we are all together here sitting in this panel. Coming to Europe, Europe is one of the big pillars of this transatlantic bridge. And I was reading an important editorial published on Le Figaro, in which it was written that despite these common values, despite the intertwined economies and the common destiny that bind us, the two sides of the Atlantic are today with profound divergences. Actually, this editorial has been published in 1951 by Raymond Aron, just a few months later the establishment of NATO. Why I'm telling this? Never a golden age on transatlantic relations never existed. Why? Because we are free democracies with freedom of speech, with different ideas, with companies in competition, and but we are all together because we are half world of the economic and military power, and so this is let's say the background on which Europe has to find now the right way on how to make more robust this transatlantic bridge. And times are different today. To be static means to roll back. In the Balkans, this is an example. Montenegro was moving forward. Some other countries was not following this example, and they are rolling back. It has been mentioned just before. So the agenda is there. The problem in Europe, in my opinion, is how and who has to lead the process. And we are coming still in the middle of an election cycle that will change the shape of the political leadership in Europe. In the United States, you are just coming out of this, and there is a leader there. We can discuss about him, but there is a clear leadership there. And still we are working on that in Europe, because France, we have still to wait for the legislative election to see how the government will be effective enough to reinforce what you was asking to me. That means a more united European in terms of not only politically speaking, but in terms of the defense programs. And here is the problem, in my opinion, because we are spending 200 billion euros per year in the defense equipment, but I don't think that to update a Trident or nuclear deterrent, or if I look that 8 European countries today are buying frigates that NATO doesn't need, is the right way. So if to have a more European Union of defense in coordinated better our expenses, and to put them on the same strategic direction for our goals, our final goals in terms of defense and security, together with our strongest, let's say in bracket, European ally, because the United States has always been the most important contributor to the European stability. So if we will be able to put this on track, this is the right direction. And not only, and I will conclude, not only because we need to compete with our budget, with the 600 billions and even more tomorrow of the American budget, because the problem is that if we turn our head from the west to the east, the picture is not nice. Since 2013, the defense expenditures on the east, I mean China, Russia, are becoming more than the European ones. And so we need to take care of this and to start thinking strategically together with our main partner.
Thank you. Dr. Pejanović-Đurišić, the last year has been one of uncertainty and questioning, but it's also been one of incredible progress for Montenegro. How has this uncertainty been manifest in Montenegro and in the region?
Well, first of all, let me express my great pleasure that we are again here and that the 7th TBS Forum is so well organized, being one of the people, small number of people, I got to say, who just 2 months in 2006, after we regained our independence, established the Atlantic Council. It is something which I do consider as a great achievement, that we are all together here today, and that we are having a perfect timing for this year to be as a forum, because actually last year we did it as a kind of, I would say, introduction to signing the protocol, and this year it is right after all ratifications are done. So being a part of the process from different parts, I've got to say that we are all very proud, and we are very proud that we did show that Montenegro, of course in cooperation with all our allies and partners, are having all necessary capacities to prove that we are having capabilities, we are having knowledge, we are having competencies, we are having the institutions which are at the level required to be a part of such a prestigious alliance as NATO is. So that's true that the last year, due to many developments in the region, around the region, transatlantic, we did have a number of issues which I would say were very confusing, at least. So from our point of view, being at the point where we were finishing our process of assessing the NATO alliance, we were very worried as well. And we were watching closely on what is going on, how the things will develop. And from that point, of course, a lot of our attention was focused towards the elections in the States and the outcomes of the elections. We were listening so carefully, all the statements, all the messages, and at one point, I think it was quite logical that we were worried. But fortunately, everything worked out for the best, which is one of the signs that the commitment from that part of the world to the NATO alliance is something which won't be changed. And somehow I do think that maybe it might be reinforced in the future due to the challenges we are all having together. On the other side as well, I was following that very closely, not only from the point of what were the messages, what were the tweets and the other things, but from the point also what were the specific and concrete solutions, like the personal choices of the, at that time, a new president-elect of the United States. And for me personally, the choices he made when it comes to the Secretary of Defense, nowadays to his national security advisors, are something which is also very encouraging, because I do believe that it matters a lot. So on the other side also, the other things we were following were the ones related with Brexit. That is something which definitely will influence the other track of our foreign policy priorities linked with our EU accession. And that is definitely another item we've got to take into account, and where from the point of security, I would say that the things are working out in a way that, again, we could be a little bit relieved, as it seems that the commitment from our friends and partners in UK towards NATO alliance won't be changed. So all that in the atmosphere where we are becoming the member of the NATO alliance, and of course it's further motivation and further incentives we are getting to keep on working the good work we've been working in the last couple of years. From the region, of course, there is a number of issues which are in our focus nowadays from the point of specifically security and stability. I wasn't that happy just an hour ago to listen to our friend Hoyt Brian Yee, who made quite a dim picture, I would say, of the region, putting together all the issues we, of course, are aware of, but when you put all that together, then you really do have a number of reasons to think about the next moves and the ways how we'll go forward. I do believe that what Montenegro did is a kind of a good example for the others, but that is not something where we will be stopping. Definitely, there is a lot of work to be done, and we are ready to be a part of the alliance, to contribute in meeting the challenges which are numerous. So when you are having even President Trump talking about the necessity to change the things, to change the alliance, not only when we are talking about sharing the burdens and the defense expenditure, which is a kind of issue you could be expecting from everyone to put forward, especially from the States. But on the other side, I would say that there is also a lot of space to work on what is the mission of NATO as such. So NATO as alliance headed a great job from the Wales summit to the Warsaw summit nowadays, due to the challenges, of course. So it's always like that. So there have been new developments, especially in the eastern flank, not only but on the southern as well. So NATO did its best to give the right responses. But on the other side, these responses are mainly on the military domain. I do believe that there is a lot of space to have the right responses now at the political level, that the alliance should adapt itself and modify itself towards better meeting up the challenges which could be resolved mainly politically. We've been talking about that a little bit in the previous panel. So military responses are there in a sense which can be agreed, but on the other side there is so many issues we could address in a different way. And I do believe that from our experience here in the region, we could contribute in formulating these kinds of responses in the future.
Thank you very much. Ms. Cooper, Secretary Mattis was this week in Lithuania, where he went to check out renewed and rising forces there, and he also was guided by a German soldier who was subject to extreme propaganda. So the Baltic states have, in the past year, increased their military commitments, and in the past 2 years, really, as a response to a perceived threat from Russia. So was Secretary Mattis visiting to reward them for meeting and even exceeding the 2%, or was he there to show his commitment and U.S. commitment to the alliance?
So thank you for that. I'll take the two parts of that, embedded two parts of that question. The Mattis visit and, in general, our posture in terms of European security vis-a-vis the Russian threat, and then the 2% question, because the two, they're separate, I suppose, linked in some ways. First, on Secretary Mattis's visit, we absolutely want to reassure our allies and our partners in Europe of the steadfast U.S. commitment for the alliance under Article 5 to their security, and absolutely recognize their concerns. Secretary Mattis, again, when he was at the NATO Defense Ministerial, spoke in terms of 2014 really being that watershed year where countries across Europe expressed great concern as they saw Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So this visit to the Baltics is just another tangible sign of the U.S. commitment to that security. And of course, this comes on top of increased US posture in Europe and in Poland under the Enhanced Forward Presence initiative. So yes, absolutely, we are showing that reassurance. When we think about the 2% question, because you raised that, I want to emphasize that commitment to 2% and that emphasis on 2% really is a reflection of this administration's importance on NATO and the need for a strong NATO to deal with this complex array of challenges. We're not looking for an alliance that looks good on paper. We want an alliance that has the right capabilities. It's the same commitment that other administrations, all previous administrations, have encouraged alliance partners to invest. And we have to recall that this 2% is a number that was generated within the alliance and that alliance members themselves committed to this investment. So the United States is merely following up on that commitment.
Would you like to respond, Dr. Lucioli? How does that look from Europe, and are we going to see increased commitments and adherence to 2%?
Let's say, first of all, that the debate on the 2%, or let's put it differently, the 2% has only a political meaning, because I hope that we are not going to apply like a mathematician the 2%, because this means that the budget of NATO will collapse tomorrow, because if the Americans will decrease their commitment to the 2%, there is no Europe that will be able to cover quite the 2% more that you are giving today. So has a strong political meaning that goes back, as it has been said, immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when we were talking about the burden sharing, then we said burden and risk sharing, and today we are talking about a more fair and equal relationship and burden. So again, the way in which this administration was telling this once again, so it's nothing new, maybe for some people was a little bit too rude, but was healthy, because in 1 year the budget of NATO was increased of 3.8. That means $10 billion more in 2016 in respect to the previous years. And we were talking about the Baltic states. Estonia is already at the 2% in the 2018. Also, the other two Baltic states will be there. Next year, Romania will join there. And but having said that, why I was saying has a strong political meaning, because going back to what I was saying before, we need to see the quality and where of the expenditures and where these expenditures are going. And it's not only a problem of cash, as we at NATO they are used to say, in terms of contributing more to common foundings of NATO, and we need these. We need drones, we need other kind of specific equipments, and but it's also a problem of capabilities, of the real capabilities that NATO needs, and this goes in a more technical issues in the NATO defense planning process that is taking years. So we need to plan together and to see how to pull the right capabilities in the right direction. And then there is a third C, let's say, that is not cash, it's not capabilities, it's commitment. And we need the right capabilities and the right commitment in terms of operations to have countries, NATO allies, able to operate where is needed and in the right way. And if I can say something coming from Italy, it's in some way an example. We are very much below the 2% and we need to increase, but we are 1.1 right now, even if we were increasing. But we were able to deploy 14,000 soldiers abroad in military operation. We are in the second contingent in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in other UN operations. We are at the first level. And we are devoting more than the 20% in research and development, because it's not only a problem of 2%, it's also to devote the 20% at least in research and development. So it's a complex issue, and mostly with a strong political meaning. We need to go there, And if I can say another positive aspect, in my opinion, on the way in which the Trump administration was putting the issue, is that while in the Wales summit, it was the 2% issue was quite a wishful thinking that was there. Finally, reading the newspapers and speaking with the public opinion, nobody's thinking if to get there, but when and how. So we are giving now for granted that we need to reach the 2%, and I think that this is a positive outcome.
Thank you. Dr. Pejanic-Jurisic, as I understand, Montenegro is already committing 1.66 or something percent of its budget for defense and has pledged for the 2% rule by 2024. What else can we expect? What other commitments is Montenegro going to make to NATO?
Well, I've got to say that when it comes to these issues, that's true. It's becoming more and more public, and people are well introduced to the issue, to all the problems, solutions, and the things like that. But on the other side, we are having a lot of misunderstandings, because when all that debate started, it was like, wow, the countries are owing to NATO certain money, so they've got to pay back and the things like that. So from that point, we've got to talk more. What is that about, actually? Because I fully agree, it's this 3C in a sense, and we've got to work on that. And that is the approach we adopted in Montenegro at the time when we were doing a strategic defense review, which has been done in a quite innovative way, but with the perspective of becoming a NATO and with the perspective of going along the criteria that is put in front of us. So from that point, it's of course the budget for the defense sector as such, which includes numerous issues, but it's on the other side the structure of that budget, which has been changed, and that was a great achievement. So there is a constant positive trend in the last couple of years, which is projected for the next couple of years, and it's only a part of commitment we are having. But it's the commitment which is, I would say, first of all, commitment to ourselves, commitment to our state and to our environment, because one of the main issues when you are part of these integration processes, whether we are talking about NATO, whether we are talking about EU, is the fact that you are changing your society, that you are modernizing your institutions, that whatever you are doing for yourself, you are doing for changing your state and everything which is related with the better off of the people who are living in Montenegro and around us. So from that point, we changed a lot, and the reforms we've been doing while adapting ourselves towards the NATO criteria proved to be very efficient. An example is what has been happening in October this year around parliamentary elections. I mean, I would like to ask everyone, if we haven't been through the process of NATO reforms and all the reforms and changes we did in our institutions, whether we would be possible to tackle that kind of a huge challenge for the small country. So from that point, I mean, another argument that all integrations are first of all for the better off of our people, and that's why we are so, I would say, convinced that we are doing the right things. From the other side, we did a lot in capacity building, and all over the administration, I believe that the situation is completely different now. There is more responsibility, there is more knowledge, there is more transparency, there is more accountability. So from that point, really, it's a small administration, but very much on the level to take all the commitments that we are talking about. On the other side, of course, when we are talking about all these issues, somehow my personal position is that whatever we hear, even these things about defense expenditure, then we are hearing that the NATO mission and vision should be changed, and I believe it should be changed. We are now having new threats we didn't have before, like extremism, like all kind of radicalism, like terrorism, like all these cyber and hybrid threats. So when we are talking about these things and when we have the start of this discussion, we've got to approach this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity first of all, to recognize what are the new challenges and threats, and then to work together on the right responses. So I'm not of those who would say, oh, it's a catastrophe, you see, they don't want NATO, they want to destroy something, and they are not committed really. No, I think that the allies, the rest of the allies, should have this kind of proactive approach. Okay, you're having something, it's bothering you, it's bothering us as well. Let's work together and let's see what is the adaptations we've got to do. So Montenegro is there, always a partner. There is a lot of people around who are ready to contribute on these lines.
Just to follow up on that, actually, I want to ask you, as it was mentioned in the first panel, Montenegro now gets a seat at the table during the deliberations and discussions in Brussels, and I'm wondering what kind of messages you think Montenegro should be sending about the region. So, Hoyt Brian, you did mention, he did a list of some of the issues that have been facing the region, and for instance, in Macedonia, many people put the root of the current political crisis with the Bucharest summit. So on Macedonia, in Kosovo, relations with Serbia got even worse in January with this train episode, and also the president has recently walked back another initiative to form an army. About Bosnia, I mean, what kind of messages do you think Montenegro should be sending about the region and regional security at these NATO meetings?
Well, the main message is that we've got to work together and to work a lot here in the region. There is no doubt that everything what was happening around from the 90s on proved that the right solutions were found in the moments when we did have, as we call it, international community, I would say US and EU present here in the region, working with us in trying to find the real way forward. So that's the fact. For the last probably 2-3 years, of course, due to the other challenges that were in Ukraine, then all these which happened with ISIS, with the migration, the focus was off from the Balkans. Sometimes people are telling, okay, it's good to have the focus off, that means there is no problems, but I wouldn't agree. Still, all the countries in the region are not on that level that we could be talking about problems being somewhere behind us. The approach Montenegro is having, which is related to, okay, so we are going into integrations, we will have security first. So we've been very much focused on that. We achieved what we achieved. As a NATO member, we are sure that we could say, okay, now we are secure, we are stable, of course, as we've been for years now, and then we could go forward with the reforms more in depth, as we are already doing, like reforms in the rule of law and everything which is law enforcement, everything coming to what is the necessity about the economical development. So it's a kind of a model that we could do, as NATO said, by projecting it in our neighborhood, and we are ready to do that. But we do think, and I do think, that it would be more efficient if we are having on our side our allies.
My opinion, for too long time we were neglecting this region in recent times. There was 2 decades that we were speaking about an unfinished business here. And it was easier to do this business before than today that we are in a more complex environment. I appreciate the proactive approach that you was mentioning, and the model, in my opinion, should be a model, let's say, a triangle, a 3-track way that you have to pave at the same time. Because you need security, of course, to attract investment, as it has been just said by your Prime Minister, that was increasing with the NATO accession. And you need economic development, but you cannot have economic development without a security environment. Entrepreneurs will not come in a country if this country is not secure. But at the same time, you need the respect of the rule of law. So all these 3 are intertwined, and you cannot have economic development if there is no respect of the rule of law, transparency, and corruption, and things like that. And everything is connected with security. So there is where we need to work, and we need to work using this international organization better, and in that so-called interlocking institution system, mutually reinforcing, or whatever it's going to be. But we must have today more effective international organization, and not only in this region. Because if we look to this more complex scenario, and we look abroad, and we go and check where in the major crisis theater, who in the major crisis theater in terms of international organization is there, you will not find them. You will not find them in Iran, you will not find them in Syria, you will not find them in the Middle East process. We have a kind of different orchestras playing with sextet, quintet, quartet, and other format. So it's time for the international organization to look better and a more effective way in those issues.
Thank you. Given President Trump's emphasis on fighting terrorism, ISIS, and the challenges of so many crises, migration crises, what is the level of U.S. commitment? What can it realistically be in the Western Balkans?
So I actually think what I've heard today, and since taking the position I'm in now, this sense of neglect or lack of attention is rather overplayed. Because if you actually look at the tangible signs of U.S. support for the Western Balkans, what you see is a steadiness, a level of support that is continuous. And I point to the concrete things. If you look at KFOR, the U.S. is still the largest troop contributor in KFOR. We are there, and we will be there until the conditions are such that we are no longer needed. Obviously, the reason we're here, in Montenegro celebrating NATO, the fact that Montenegro will be the next member of NATO, is a tangible sign of U.S. commitment to the region. We see the accession of Montenegro to NATO as being a tremendous sign of stability in the region, and something that we were willing to lend our political support behind. Other tangible signs relate to the day-to-day cooperation that we have between our militaries. Security assistance levels between the U.S. and the countries of the Western Balkans are steady, actually, if you actually take the time to look at those budget figures. Military exercises, they're ongoing and continuing in the region. If you look at state partnership programs, we actually have really robust partnership programs between states in the United States with countries of the Western Balkans. All of the countries of the Balkans actually have a partner. And then if you think in terms of cooperation in the region that's more of a political nature, I would cite the Adriatic Charter and the U.S. membership and participation in the Adriatic Charter as an organization that allows for fostering of security cooperation within the region, but then also integration with NATO. These are concrete things that we're doing, that we have been doing, that we continue to do, and that will, support in the future. So I think we shouldn't lament a lack of attention, because the attention is there.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room which has questions for the panelists, so at this time I would like to open it up to questions. Let's see if there's a mic around, and of course if you can limit your interventions to questions rather than comments would be great. So we have a mic over here. Do I see any hands? Okay. I see one, a lot of hands.
A lot of hands?
So many hands, the best hands. Okay, so we have one question. We can take more than one question at a time. If there's anybody else with a question.
I'm Saran Georgi. I'm from Kosovo. As I presented myself in the earlier sessions, I'm head of the Foreign Relations and Security at the Social Democratic Party of Kosovo. I have one question for Ms. Cooper. Do you believe that the Russian influence in Europe and in the region is swiftly changing the balance of powers between US, Europe, and also other parts of the region, where you serve more the Baltic Sea and the Russian area? And in this, taking to this account, how does Kosovo fit into all this newly situation presented entirely globally. Thank you.
Anybody else? Everybody's hungry, I guess, for lunch, huh? I promise that we'll finish early, but let's go. Maybe you can answer this one, and then we'll see if there's anything else.
Yeah, I got all the questions. On the issue of Russia, we are concerned with the fact that Russia has chosen to be a strategic competitor with the United States and with the West. Recent actions going back to 2008 with the invasion of Georgia, 2014 in Ukraine, illegal annexation of Crimea, continued support to this day for the separatists in eastern Ukraine, violation of arms control agreements with the United States, and certainly it's Russia's campaign of malign influence operations. We've spoken about them in the context of Montenegro, but also in the context of the United States and our recent election. So all of these are troubling developments. I would not say, though, that we are concerned about the strength of the NATO alliance or of our ability to pull together as an alliance to promote resilience and deter future aggression. I think that's what you've seen in recent days in terms of, we mentioned the Secretary Mattis visit this week, but that is a manifestation of this increased presence by the United States and by European allies in the Baltics and Eastern Europe, this increased resilience focus and increased deterrence focus. So this is an area where I think we have more to do. I would say that the response to Russia's campaign of malign influence operations does require a whole of government response. It requires increasing awareness of populations about these influence campaigns so that individuals can recognize these campaigns for what they are. I think we saw some success in this regard with the recent French election, actually, where you saw a greater public awareness. But we also need to promote our own resilience, to include cyber resilience. But I think we're taking the right prudent steps to be able to increase that resilience both in the United States and as an alliance. In terms of your specific point to Kosovo, I would just offer that the United States continues to encourage Kosovo's progress and stability. We do want to see that continued progression towards reform within the country. We are still cooperating with, from a Defense Department perspective, the Kosovo security forces to enable that security capability. We appreciate recent progress in dealing with the foreign fighter threat, to include from a legal standpoint, tightening up approaches to dealing from a law enforcement and security standpoint with dealing with that threat. I'd leave it there.
Okay.
And if possible, the reflection between what is the situation and the Kosovo right now. And since Kosovo is the first and only officially anti-terror country in the anti-terrorist organization or group, international group of countries fighting terrorism, how now, or in what kind of position you think Kosovo maintains, since the Russian influence is growing there, and also we're being left out for the time being of NATO?
So I would go back to some of my earlier comments and the points about resilience. So we do see, but Kosovo actually, I think, is like many other countries in the region in the need to continue to improve rule of law and the institutions of the state, anti-corruption initiatives, to withstand the pressure of external forces, particularly Russia, in the face of these challenges. So I think Kosovo needs to continue on this path, and the United States is standing right by Kosovo as it does that.
We have one question here, a second question.
Thank you very much. I'm Tim Judah, correspondent from The Economist from London. You talked about resilience. You mentioned the word cyber, and there's been mention of propaganda, etc. I was wondering whether anybody could tell us exactly in concrete terms what's being done to sort of counter the influence of sort of dozens of websites across the region, which are clearly kind of sort of fake news things designed to sort of propagate Russian propaganda. And when it comes to cyber, actually, is NATO or can NATO do anything for the individual countries to help protect them? I was discussing this with somebody in Kosovo recently, asking, well, okay, Kosovo is not about to join NATO, but I'm talking about it in general for the region, and asked, well, if somebody decided that they wanted to turn off your electricity or attack your critical infrastructure, what defenses have been put in place? And the answer was, well, like, we haven't really done anything about that, or not very much. What about here? What about the rest of the region? What's being done, and is NATO playing a role? Thank you.
Thanks. And we had 2 more questions here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is István Szentiványi. I am the Vice Chairman of the Hungarian Atlantic Council, and I would like to ask Mr. Lucioli on the role of the Atlantic Council in the region. I think they can play a very crucial and instrumental role in resilience and in opposing the Russian influence. And how do you see that the local branches are very active that, or can you provide some help? And is there any project of the Atlantic Association of Treaty Association, Atlantic Treaty Association, to provide a project which really can counter the Russian influence? Thank you.
Thank you. And 1 more here.
Well, first I would start by thanking the panelists for very insightful contributions. My name is Sandro Knezovic. I'm working at the Institute for Development and International Relations in Zagreb. I have a question to Mrs. Cooper. How do you tackle Russian policy of creating frozen conflicts in order to block further enlargement of the transatlantic community eastwards, in particular in post-Soviet space? I mean, it's clear that there will be no compromise for NATO enlargement to the country that is actually not controlling its territory, because you simply cannot apply Article 5. And Article 5 is the essence of cooperative security concept. And in this regards, are there geopolitical boundaries of enlargement of the transatlantic community to the east? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
I can start.
Okay.
Just since it's a top of mind, the last question about frozen conflicts, I actually just recently got back from a visit to Georgia, and I think just speaking in terms of how the U.S. views its role in Georgia and its ability to support the Georgian government in defending its own territorial integrity, I think is an important aspect of your question about the frozen conflict issue space. The U.S. Joined with NATO, actually NATO has a very substantial training effort in Georgia, is supporting the Georgian Ministry of Defense in its substantial defense reforms to create a modernized and sustainable institution that can promote the defense of Georgian territory. This is both bilateral and multilateral initiative, and we continue to make investments to support Georgian defense. So we see this as a substantial part of our role in deterring future Russian action in Georgia, but also elsewhere. In terms of your question about NATO open door policy, I actually thought that the statement that the White House issued on the occasion of the Senate vote of Montenegro's NATO accession was quite illustrative, and I just want to read it for you because it stands for itself. They said that this signals to other NATO aspirants that the door to membership in the Euro-Atlantic community of nations remains open, and that countries, in this case in the Western Balkans, are free to choose their own futures and select their own partners without outside interference and intimidation. So that point about countries are free to choose their own partners, choose their own futures and select their own partners without outside interference applies to all of these countries. On the cyber point, I'm going to probably lose a few of the threads, but of that, I would just say that there's a few aspects of what is going on, but I'm not going to claim that our efforts are comprehensive or that we've done everything we need to do to improve cyber resilience, whether you're talking from a U.S. standpoint or from a NATO alliance standpoint. I think part of it is that public awareness and recognition so that we're actually talking about the cyber threat in a very common sense way. That's why the U.S. intelligence agencies issued that unclassified report about the Russian attempts to manipulate the U.S. election system. That was an unclassified, publicly available report intended to heighten awareness of what is actually happening. Then there's the resilience aspect when it comes to actual capabilities development. And some of this is member state by member state. Certainly the US has a very robust effort to build our own mission assurance capabilities for defense forces, but also to extend into the civilian sector to improve civilian sector resilience against cyber threats. And NATO member states also have their own efforts. But I think there's a huge information sharing and intelligence sharing aspect that also comes into play. And this is where you really see the strength of alliance arrangements to be able to share information and to be able to support each other. So I would kind of leave it at that, but I'm sure you have some useful insights on this as well.
Maybe I'll just add on what you've been talking about. I mean that probably Mr. Juder should know that on the Warsaw Summit, the NATO adopted a decision which has been approved by all, that the cyber is a new operational domain, which is giving a foundation for all kinds of activities which are going on. And yes, that is the truth, that NATO is the only alliance that could help to the member states when it comes to these issues. EU is not having these kind of capabilities, or they are not having the infrastructure, they are not having the networks, and it's not possible at this stage to expect any kind of support from that address. But from NATO, yes, they are working very hard on that. They've got organizational change in the sense of intelligence, so that the information sharing should be better. And we experienced very valuable support from these NATO structures for more than a year now, because we've been exposed to these different things. But not only in giving the responses, but also in fostering our capabilities and fostering our organization to have the resilience at the level which is necessary. So from that point, I would say that the answer is definitely NATO is ready to give us a hand on these issues. But on the other side, I do believe that there is a special role there for the governments, for the administration, for the NGO sector, for media as well. As when you are talking about combating fake news, then of course the only efficient way is to be all the time present, to have the right strategy of strategic communication, which, for example, Montenegro has done, again in cooperation with some allies, but within the NATO as well. So from that point, a lot of things are going on, and NATO is instrumental in achieving the necessary level when it comes to these things. But of course, we've got to have in mind, when we are talking about cyber, then it's about actually men. It's about the persons who are involved in all the processes. I just came through some survey which has been done a month ago among the ICT professionals. And even those professionals which are dealing with security as such, that survey shows that it's again about the awareness, personal awareness of what are these threats about. And that is where it is necessary that maybe NATO administration in all member states reinforce these training activities. That is very, very important. And I've got to say that our experience, say, at the time when those hacker attacks started, when it comes to the Ministry of Defense of Montenegro, and it was a year ago, then after the careful analysis, despite all the technology we did have in place, it has been quite clear that the main issue why we haven't been exposed was the fact that our people in the Ministry of Defense was well trained. So they resisted. It's about them.
Thank you. Managed to do what the Democratic Party in the United States did not manage, I guess.
Probably they haven't paid attention on that.
You still have a question open.
Yes, it's a very complex issue, and fortunately many things has been very well said. And cyber, the fifth domain, but it's very difficult to choose the right answer. And for instance, NATO, many times on terrorism, on cyber, on energy security, on climate change, we are asking NATO to do this, NATO what is doing, and I remember that at the end of the Cold War, when there was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the question was why NATO? And today it seems to me that it's why NATO is not doing this, why NATO is not doing that, why NATO is not doing this other issue. So for some aspects this is very good. But on the other side, I'm not a NATO officer, so let me be provocative. NATO doesn't want and doesn't have to do everything. It's a total different animal in the international security scenario in respect to other international organizations. NATO is not the United Nations. NATO is not the European Union, and something completely different. Is an intergovernmental organization that is pulling together nations and capabilities to address some specific issues and to provide added value to the nations in the way that they can counter some threats for the defense and security. So, practically speaking, what it means on cyber. On cyber, it means that NATO is looking to offer added value where it's possible with additional capabilities, with sharing intelligence information. That's why we have a new division on intelligence at NATO now, and with teams that are going to make possible a better resilience and to make possible to recover a critical situation in case of an attack. But I'm not sure that a missile would be the right answer if a nerd in our if my daughter in the computer will attack the Pentagon or something like this. NATO was protecting the infrastructure of the NATO commands, of the NATO structure, and supporting the other ally and supporting allies in having a better protection. And European Union also is doing this. There is one critical issue that we are debating at NATO, for instance, regarding cyber. The NATO is a defensive organization, while today, in my very personal and lonely opinion, we need to have also offensive instruments on a daily basis when we're talking about cyber. And this is what United States are doing, the United Kingdom are doing with important and relevant commands on this that are working on a daily basis in order to counter the cyber threat. Take into consideration that NATO is suffering an average of 500 cyber attacks per month. And so we need to get there, and there is also a discussion on the principle that are at the base of our action at NATO. Regarding fake news, regarding hybrid warfare, let's say, and other issues, and I will come to the question of our friend and colleague from Hungary. There is, let's say, many of the issues today are in some ways crossing different platforms, at least 3 different layers of answer. One is international, in which NATO, European Union can enhance the answer, can provide intelligence sharing information and so on. But in many cases, as for cyber, terrorism and other security issues, it's a priority and national domain to address this issue. You can take advantage from the support of the international organization, but it's up to the countries and to national government to provide the right answer, as you, Minister, you were saying. But I will add a third layer, that is that in which we need to work more, and the Atlantic Treaty Association, the Atlantic Council of Montenegro was playing a great role in this country, and all of us in Hungary has to work. That is the civil society, the public opinion, and to work with the citizens. Citizens has to become tomorrow the first tile of a new security mosaic. In some countries, in the UK, maybe in the US, this is more felt and understood rather than in many European countries. And there it's where ATA, the Atlantic Treaty Association, is working. Let me say that I'm quite proud to say that probably, if we look to this room, the Atlantic Treaty Association, the Atlantic Council, are probably the only one able to connect all these three layers. We have a government, officials and representatives in this room. We have experts, we have the think tanks, we have the military, we have the diplomats, and we have the civil society. And this is more and more important today, because we need to work all together exactly on this thread that has been mentioned before.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more round of questions. I hear some stomachs grumbling in the front, but I see one hand back here. Anything else?
Hello, my name is Colonel Fitzgibbon. I'm a UK Defence Attaché. Recalling Dr. Carpenter's comments in the earlier panel, referring to the potential for reviewing Tallinn conditionality, I think it asks or begs the broader question, which I put to the panel: is it acceptable? Is it even desirable that in the future we should review the standards of NATO membership, and potentially meaning to potentially lower the standards of required of NATO membership for future aspirants? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more hands? No. Okay. Oh, one more, and another one here.
There are informations that Russians are putting equipment on the submarines to localize or to detect the optic cables through which goes all the information for this word. This will give to them the possibility to attack in two ways: to collect information that pass through, but even to make disinformation passing through. So there are some recommendations to create a force to protect, to fight against cyber attack. Do you know that as panel there are movements on this way to create this new branch in NATO or in EU? If you have information, it will be interesting for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start?
Maybe I'll just comment on what we've heard relating to Dr. Carpenter's intervention. Actually, I didn't understand that he was pledging for lowering down the criteria. He talking about the region, he was talking about the issues we discussed so many times before, which were related with actually certain specific conditions which were put in front of some countries in the region when it comes to coming to certain levels of accession towards NATO. Specifically, it was about the name issue, it's about the military property and issues like that. So actually, definitely, there is a certain need when we are talking about the integration of these countries around Montenegro to reconsider whether that kind of a road which has been drawn down years ago is still something which is sustainable, or we need to look closely if these are actually the preconditions which are vital, or there is some space for modification there, but not on the level of what has to be achieved to be prepared for the membership. I mean, that is something, of course, which is up to all 29 member states tomorrow, but still I don't think that it's an issue which should be in that way tackled when we are talking about these things. On the other side as well, when we are talking about the cyber, definitely there is a lot of disinformation and propaganda on the ways how these different cyber attacks could be performed, actually. And being a professor in telecommunications engineering, I've got to say that everything which someone could put as a sound on any submarine can't go into what is optical cables are transmitting. So from that point, we are safe. There are other things which are much more vulnerable and where the certain kind of attention is definitely on.
Thank you.
Regarding the standards, let's say that the standards are in Article 10 of the NATO Treaty is there. The standard to apply to NATO membership is to be a democratic European country, and you can apply. Then the success of NATO enlargement was its flexibility. Each country has his own specificities, and so there was a tailored membership action plan to get there. And the final and ultimate goal is the contribution to the security of the whole alliance. So that is the major goal. The way in which you can arrive and the way in which the action plan is bring it to that point could be different from one country to another one. So standards on this respect is going to be different. So I don't know if it's a problem of to put it higher or lower. It depends from country to country. And regarding the question of General Balliu, he used to be my student in the Italian Military Academy, and I was never offering the microphone to him. But having said that, let's say that we are more or less at NATO and the European Union getting to that point in terms of task forces and contribution. And one of my opinion, great achievement of the recent months, let's say last year, is the enhancement, a very, very high enhancement of the NATO-EU cooperation. And as you know, probably you know, at the end of last year in December, there was a joint work, and that for the first time was made jointly by NATO and European officers at the same table, in which they were sharing the same experience, also on the cyber domain. That is one of the 7 areas of cooperation on 42 different projects where NATO and EU are cooperating now together. And regarding cyber now, they are sharing the same playbook. So they are putting together the same capabilities to go exactly on that direction. And this is something very important in my opinion, and cyber is probably on the first row in this respect, because finally we are coming out from that principle of division of labor between NATO and the European Union. This is my domain, this is not yours, but both are global actors. We're talking about the global strategy of the European Union, and so they are both in the same domain, the 5th domain of the cyber instead, other area of crisis. And now it's time not to divide the labor, but to put together the best capabilities of both the organization.
Final remarks.
I'll just comment on the last point in the sense that you covered the technicalities of the communications architecture. I am not an engineer, so I will not try to comment on that. But just from a resilience standpoint, the way the United States thinks about mission assurance, we look at all domains, whether we're dependent on any kind of critical infrastructure. It could be space architecture. It could be, a cyber-related dependency. He mentioned the undersea domain, and we look to shore up the resilience of all of these domains. So this is just one aspect of the considerations that the U.S. would take when looking at our operations, and certainly I would say the same for the NATO alliance. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to invite everyone to partake in a Montenegrin feast for lunch. Thank you very much for your attention and your thought-provoking questions.